And now it is my honor to present to you the Prime Minister of Iceland. She's going to give a closing address discussing the position of Iceland in the international system. Katrín Jakobsdóttir, go ahead.
Ágætu gestir, dear guests, I have not been here the whole time, but I have read the book. I don't know about you guys, but I read the book this weekend, so that's my excuse for being here, delivering these closing remarks. And first, I just would like to congratulate Baldur and his colleagues on this publication, because I think it is so important for a small state like Iceland to have scholars who are focusing on international affairs, international relations, not least in these times where everything we knew about international relations is changing day by day. So, congratulations. I think it's a very important thought that we are discussing here about shelters and small states. And I agree with the conclusion that small states are heavily dependent upon both international and bilateral collaboration. And it is also the key element in building up peaceful and prosperous societies, as well as protecting and promoting freedom and human rights. Many of the civil liberties we enjoy today are actually the result and product of international treaties and obligations. And if we think about the situation today, I sometimes doubt that we could have reached as progressive international legislation as the generations before us did. When we think about the political climate today, I could mention the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is still today a fundamental instrument in the protection of human rights across the world. Would we be able to deliver that product today? It's an imposing question, really. If I take more recent example, the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence is a major tool in the protection and promotion of women's rights in Europe and beyond. And Iceland was one of the first countries to sign the Istanbul Convention, which was the precondition for its entry into force. And through this and the recent ratification, Iceland has, in cooperation with other states, put pressure on others to adapt the standards and protections offered by the Convention. And even though no country, and Iceland definitely included, has managed to achieve full equality between men and women, Iceland's progress in this field could serve as a prescription, which can be useful for other states and civil society organizations. And similarly, Iceland on a daily basis refers to other countries in its policy making. Indeed, through international collaboration on gender, Iceland has managed to communicate one of its important values, equality. And values matter in international collaboration. And I think that's one of the lessons learned from this book. But when we are talking about international collaboration, we need to think about values. Iceland has historically projected itself as a peaceful country, associated itself with non-violent settlements of international disputes, and Iceland is also advocating a collective approach on climate change, which I see maybe as the most pressing issue today, globally, in today's politics, together with the need to reduce social inequalities in the world. As you were talking about here in this panel discussion, and as you talk about in the book, small states like Iceland need many allies in the world, but also a diverse group of allies. This does not mean that Iceland's policy should be based on the notion that all states should be approached or treated equally. We live in a world that has become increasingly authoritarian, where new undemocratic political formations, financial crisis, social and ethnic exclusion, and information wars have undermined democratic processes. This means that friends can become enemies far too quickly, and that is why values matter, especially for small states, and our relationship with other countries should be guided by them. I would like to say, when we are thinking about us as a small state, we need to be very much aware of the interests of great powers, and powerful economic interests can take precedence over the interests of the less powerful. And that can be difficult when you're a small state. We should also be mindful of the fact that small states can have a leverage which reduces dependency on larger states or collectivities and which can be used to promote their own foreign policy agenda. And as Baldur was saying, if we think about Nordic cooperation, for example, we have seen that when the Nordic countries collaborate, they actually, you could say that they weigh a lot more than putting just their independent weight together. They actually can push above their weights. The Nordic countries are our key allies in the world, and we have always placed much emphasis on the Nordic cooperation, Nordic Council, and other venues. And I think, as I said, we have a stronger voice collectively than each on our own. The extent of Nordic collaboration has influenced Iceland in multiple ways, both our identity and the ways in which we are perceived in the world order. And this has been beneficial in a myriad of ways, allowing this group of states to push for progressive policies, as was the case in the 60s and the 70s when the Nordics actually took the lead in both environmental issues and issues of disarmament. And today, where the Nordic countries are a global leader on women's rights, peace, and social justice. But I could mention other forums. International collaboration within the United Nations, where Iceland actually decided to take that place in the Human Rights Council, which means that discussions on foreign policy in Iceland will change. And I hope they will change for good. Not for good, for better, sorry, when you're not speaking your native language and all that. And what do I mean by that? I do hope that discussion about foreign affairs will become more mature, more developed in Iceland, because being there in the Human Rights Council means that we have to often take a more balanced view on issues, that we have to consider our stand very carefully, and I think it might prove very good for us as a society to take that responsibility, not just to follow the lead of others, but take that responsibility individually as a society. And I hope it will also be good for the discussion about foreign politics in Iceland. I could mention also the Council of Europe, which can actually prove an important forum for Iceland. And I also agree with the fact that's mentioned in the book, that we could actually nurture our relations with individual states within the EU better. And I hope I will make Baldur glad when I tell him that my next meetings are in France and Germany. so I'm following your conclusions here. We should not hesitate to prioritize bilateral relationship when needed, because if we've learned something from the financial crisis is the fact that we should never put our eggs in the same basket. Of course, as our panelists were talking about, when it comes to shelter, we are very close to the idea of security. And we have a national security policy which the Parliament actually passed in 2016. And there you have all the pillars. You have the defense mechanism with the US, you have the membership of NATO, but you have also that broad conception of security, which I think is the basis for this book, which is to think about different types of shelter, political, economical, societal, security shelters. And that's really, could I say, mirrors the thought that the Parliament was trying to pass on through that national security policy, and looking at security from a broader point of view than we have maybe done in the last decades. And I think that's also a very important step for Iceland, because we may not always agree on foreign policy, but all politicians have to bear in mind that one of their primary obligations is to ensure the security of all their citizens. That's just part of running an independent state. As for Iceland's role internationally, I firmly believe that we should continue to working towards peaceful solutions to conflicts, advocating for equality, human rights, and sustainability. Internationalism and universal rights are under threat across the world, and small states can actually be key players in promoting international law and values instead of raw power interests. Because for us, that really matters, that we follow the international law and and ensure that all people are granted their rights. And for this reason, I want to emphasize here that while small states need to rely on collaboration with other like-minded states and multilateral organizations, they also have an agency. They have their own voice. And we, as a small country, need to use our voice wisely, and I think we have every opportunity of doing so. Thank you very much.
Excellent.